So the concept of mosaics being about taking broken pieces, which is a great metaphor.
Yes.
You have brokenness in your life. You pick up those pieces. You pick up some pieces over here. You're adding things together, and you're creating something of beauty out of that brokenness. And I love that metaphor, working with kids that are coming from divorce, kids that have been sexually abused, kids that are incarcerated, adults. Like, all of us have like adversity and brokenness that happens in our lives. And what do you do with that? But then lately, like, focusing on the broken part is not feeling the same. And I'm, as an artist, I'm really understanding what I want to learn more and incorporate more in my work with people is the weaving.
Right.
Like the taking all of these strands, all these experiences, all these unique situations and people, some of them beautiful and some of them tragic and painful, and weaving that together.
It's interesting that you say that, because David Brooks
Yes.
just started Weave.
Oh, no way!
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yes, I just heard an interview with him, though.
Yeah. So he started with, it's a collaboration, I think, with the Aspen Institute, and it's about, recognizing that the fabric of our country is tattered, and that we need to weave through. And he calls them people that are initiating these efforts of weaving a community back together. He's calling them weavers. So you're a weaver.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. And
I love that.
And it's, when you talk about a lot of the tragedies that are occurring, and you specifically cited things that are occurring in schools across the country, and the violence and the anger, right, that's radiating from these kids. Where's that coming from? And then not from, I don't think it's coming from them. It's like we talked about earlier about these layers of stories that get placed upon us that really aren't ours, and whether it's coming from, whether they, number one, they have the tools to understand what their true nature is, and it's probably not violence.
Right.
And then when something like that happens, I always say, how do you recover from it? Like, I know how myself as an individual would recover from that, but you're talking about groups of damaged people, and how do you, and back to your weave metaphor.
We've been working for years and years trying to build a collection of resiliency tools,
right?
Because sometimes one thing doesn't work, so like, okay, that's not working, I am not bouncing back from this, I am stuck in this place of, grieving takes a long time, but there is still a level of like being responsive and still functioning in your life on a certain level. Like, you can't just drop out for 2 years to process every little bit of the grief. Like, there is that, like, having to weave this into the rest of your life. And the Jewish tradition, you wear like a black ribbon for a year after you've lost someone of real significance in your life, just to let people know I'm not operating at my highest magnitude right now.
And I think that that made me think of our expectations that we have on each other and how we operate at a higher level. Do you know what I mean? At our peak performance. And we have no room to allow people to, I don't want to say fall apart, but regroup, right?
Right.
I mean, we really don't, you make a mistake, and then you're wearing that, mistake for a very long time. And our compassion and our and I don't say inability to forgive, but our awareness of that inability to forgive, and how that affects, really, it affects us.
Well,
I mean, at a personal level, right? I mean, it obviously affects the dynamic of a relationship.
But it starts right here.
Yeah, and it's
because if you can't forgive the other people, you can't forgive this part either. Like, it is a reflection, and that's the whole thing with love. Like, if you can't fully love yourself and accept yourself, you can't do it out there either.
You can't authentically love somebody else, true. And then you think of how many people have you met that authentically love themselves,
right?
And then you say the word love, right? And you're not feeling it here. I mean, I've certainly done that. I'm like, wow, that came out of my mouth, but I don't really feel it in my body.
But that could be
Right.
part of the practice
Right.
too. You know, like you fake it until you make it sort
Right.
of thing. Like I'm practicing this, and that's like the kids that I'm working with. You know, I try to like solidify or condense these like really lofty ideas and practices down to how can you be nice? How can we be more kind? And part of that is recognizing, you know, we do a check-in. Everyone gets the chance to say how they're feeling, and to make yourself vulnerable enough to say in this moment, and it's a numeric thing, you know, like I'm an 8, the scale is 10 is the best.
Right.
So like you're good. This kid that's checking in at a 2, something really sad is going on at home in their lives. I mean, some of the kids I had this week were living in a homeless shelter. My grandmother just got sent to jail, who was the person who was taking care of this child. You know, he's like, I'm checking in, you know, like I'm a 2. And, you know, some of them, one kid went on to explain why. The homeless shelter kid, the teacher told me later what was going on with them. But when you're working in a group and you've got 8s and 7s and then a couple 2s and 3s, like you don't even know how to be compassionate unless people have the space to even share what their situation is in that moment.
Well, and I think we've talked about this before, but the space which requires vulnerability and for people to say, this is where I'm showing up or not showing up. And everybody being okay with that. And it's interesting as we find out more about, like you said, practice. We're practicing being human beings every day, right?
Yeah.
And so you think of the practice of medicine. And the physicians in this model can't really practice because they're afraid of being sued, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we kind of can extrapolate practicing being a human being. I mean, there's very few places I think where people feel safe, and especially with social media, the way that's not a safe place either.
No.
Where people feel, oh, I have this connection when you really don't. But I'm going off on a tangent here. The one thing about you talking about the kids and that one child checking in at a 2, and I was reading a book by a primatologist, and he was talking about research that they've done with different species, and he was talking about the study with voles. And so I don't know what you call a colony of voles, I think.
Right.
Like, I guess they're the same as a colony of mice, colony of voles.
Yeah.
And they measured their level of stress. I mean, particularly the marker was cortisol.
Right.
And in a group. And they found that, okay, as this group is functioning at a very, good level, there's no stress hormones involved here. Then they introduced a vole that was highly stressed out. And the whole colony
It's a contagion.
took on the stress level of that one vole. So you think of, I'm thinking about your children, of
Right.
everybody's an 8 and 9, this one kid is a 2. The others have the responsibility to bring that child in and raise them.
Soothe. But if they're not even aware that there are 2, there's no ability to do that. So when you start with that point, like, how are we?
Right.
And, to be collaborating, which we're all doing all day, every day, whether or not we want to recognize it, on these projects, we're making something together. But yeah, just to be able to check in, like, how are you?
Right.
How are you? No, like, not fine. Like, how are you today? And I always answer that honestly, which, is a complicated question for me. There are some great things and some really hard things. But that's my practice, to try to be true and authentic. Like, I'm not that great right now. Like, I am weepy, I'm sad, like I'm still missing these people that I've lost. Like I'm challenged by environmental degradation. Like I am like using all my tools and there's still not enough. And sometimes just being heard is wonderful medicine. But I think having people really recognize that, like, everyone, I think Ben Harper has a line in his song. It's from the album Both Sides of the Gun, which is a great name for an album. Both Sides of the Gun. You are the shooter and you're being shot. Everyone I know is in the fight of their life. Everyone I know is in the fight of their life. Like, we are all struggling to try to, live in a world that is not really receptive.
Right. And we were talking about resilience, and you think, and you think about Andrew Zolli. Krista Tippett interviewed him a few years ago, and he was talking about the components of psychological resilience. So what are they, right? One is you have a community of people that you've cultivated that are there for you in a moment of crisis.
Right.
Like you believe that obstacles are put in your way for a reason, to teach us.
Yeah.
And that you believe you have agency in the world, like you believe you have purpose, and you believe you can, contribute.
Or at least some measure of all those things. Right.
And I think that...
and when you don't have those things, which is like back to the school kids, like they're literally in prison. I mean, they have to go there. They cannot leave. They have to walk in a straight line. They have to sit in their desks. They have to follow these rules constantly. And they don't have agency.
Right.
And their community is enforced and it's artificial, but it is a community. Like, I'm not saying, like, schools, some of them are beautiful, but, like, they're not safe places for a lot of people. And they have no agency to leave. And I think that's something that we don't recognize either. Like, we treat children as if they're not humans.
Right. Yeah. And there was a great, this was... within the last year they broadcast it, but there was a TED Talk that was given by a 12-year-old girl. And they actually interviewed her 6 years later when she was 18. But she was like, hey, you know what? We have a voice. Like, we're creative. We have some great ideas. Why don't you treat us that way? Why don't adults, sometimes they're smarter than adults because they don't have the
was it
minutia.
Greta from Sweden or Switzerland that did the TED Talk, trying to raise awareness and start a movement with high school kids about global warming? I will someone please take this seriously? Like, we can't even vote. I mean, she had a huge, million, student movement backing up, trying to, you've got to address this. Like, we are doing the best we can, but, you guys have the power. You have the money. You have the political pull. Our kids are smart. Yeah, and they're closer to the source. And that's the other piece of resiliency, psychological resiliency, is there has to be, I feel, some connection to something that's bigger and wiser than this.
Right.
There has to be some connection to whatever you call spirit. Whether you see it in nature or in the Bible or in the Christian God or a Buddhist God or a Hindu God, you kind of have to have some sort of the universe has some order, and I am part of that divinity. I mean, I just feel when I am at my lowest, all right, I'll pray. I will pray for myself. I will ask for love and peace and understanding and happiness, and do that for the adversarial components that are happening. And, that is potent, and that has been scientifically proven, how potent prayer is and how effective prayer is for everything, for, people recovering from surgery, the resiliency to bounce back from a surgery, for addiction issues. It's really, really potent. And I think it's underutilized. And that's the piece, as I've been confronting, some darkness around looking at all of the systems in the world that are not functioning well, that are not considering the well-being of all of the people.
And species.
Right. The species, the trees are people. The plants are people.
We share a quarter of our DNA with trees.
I did not know that. Is that an over story? Just on my list.
Yeah, and it's I feel, when you're talking about when we start thinking about the broader picture of how we're affecting our planet, right?
Yeah, our planet.
And you get, I sometimes get so bogged down and so depressed about the lack of awareness, and back to what you said, that, we have to, instill this importance of awareness,
Right.
and how we are part of each other, right? And how we affect each other. And I don't know about you, but I feel like there's been more information in the mainstream media about how
Nature heals. We need
and how
wild
connected
places.
Right.
Yeah. And how
and
your
that's what-
cortisol comes down immediately if you go into nature. Like immediate blood pressure decrease, cortisol decrease. And Shafari Tedsbury in her book, I think it's The Awakened Parent, she talks about, as children, like nobody has to tell you or ask you who you are or what you want to be when you grow up. Like you know what that is, and you are in a state of wonder. You will spend hours gazing at leaves and butterflies and just completely are in awe of the natural world. But then you get drug away to go to preschool and drug away to go to these lessons, and like you're already creating your resume so you can get into college because you've got to do these things and figure out what you're going to be. Like they already know who they are.
Right.
They know how they fit. They are in all of their connection and they're celebrating it. And then, it gets sort of beat out of us.
But you think about also the high incidence of anxiety and depression in this upcoming generation, and how, to your point, you're dragging these, and again, I don't have children, but dragging these children into a very structured, results-driven mindset, which then completely shuts down, the intuition and the creativity and the wonderment.
Yeah.
And you're taking the freedom away from them in a lot of, in many instances.
You're taking their agency away.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
and then so how do you get back to that? You think about, I think about, I've seen some, situations where, there's, how is this person going to get out of this situation? Like how, and I mean, the codependency piece is, I can help this person.
Oh, yeah.
But no, that's that this is their journey, and, their resilience piece needs to come from them, and there may be tools out there to help them, but in reality there's not much.
Well, yeah, that's it. I'm going to fix them, when the actuality is like, you need to do this work. Like they're fine. Right. You're projecting all of your stuff onto them, and woman is saying, and she's like, and I was the worst offender. Right. Like I was going to have these kids that were going to do X, Y, and Z, and they were going to know all this stuff and be all these things and play 3 instruments and know 3 languages, and they were going to be ready to take on the world and be successes. Without, she's like, I had to be like pulled away from that.
I've seen a couple instances lately where families have stopped by the restaurant on their way to looking at colleges, and this one family in particular, the mother rattled off the colleges that they were going to visit, and where she would like him to go. And I looked at him and I said, what feels good to you? And he didn't know how to answer that question. And he mentioned what
never
college.
Had the opportunity before.
And he mentioned, the college that felt good. And then the mother's like, oh, that's way too far away. That's not.
Right.
And it was like, wow, I hope he's able to find his voice. And you think of how, when we talk about resilience, there's no room for control, right? I mean, you have to have the space to be able to unpack it all and unfold.
And that's the other piece,
And then, when we're in a tough situation, we want to control everything. Because we don't want to feel that. And then we don't want to feel that being out of control. Which
and groundlessness. And
And whatlessness?
The groundlessness of like what I thought was solid is not solid.
Right.
I think my homework in therapy for years was like trying to be comfortable with the unknown. Like you just are not going to know. Eve Ensler's last book was Insecure at Last. Finally stripping all the way and dropping that down. Like after traveling and hearing all of these tragic war stories of women that were, had the most horrible acts, committed upon their physical beings. Like how can these women have the resiliency to come back from
and shine?
Right.
Right.
And so this woman whose name I cannot remember, but the book she wrote was called Ruby, and she tells her story. Brilliant writer. She read some of it out loud, of going from victim to victor.
Right. Well, that's and that's an interesting. You think of, I've been listening to people's language. For some reason, the last couple of months, I've been interested in how people relate to themselves. And you hear a lot of victim language, right? And you feel like, wait a minute, we all have the right to be empowered. But a lot of people are not making that choice, right?
Right.
And they feel like, I'm here because of this, and that person did this to me, and
well, Anne Watts' album, Your Wound is Your Crown.
Right.
She said the same thing.
Right.
I have a seam in my heart that is pain that will never heal completely. It is there, but it's a badge of honor.
Right.
And because of that, I am able to do this. And she's like, the act of writing this story down and is healing. It's a release. And also, she's like, it healed my mom.
Right.
Like, for my mom to have this story told, she's like, now she's free too. And to be able to do that for myself, to heal myself and my mom. And I think that healing has to happen in past generations.
Sure. But I also think that the healing, there needs to be an awareness that we get stuck in these emotional patterns, right?
Oh yeah.
So we have a feel, something feels familiar, and we gravitate towards that, but it may not be healthy, right?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
recognizing that, that you need to change your relationship to that, change, rewiring your neurochemistry,
and
right?
she said she was in that victim mode, and she was in the rock bottom. She's like, I had worn a gray shirt she's like, I don't want to tell you how many weeks I had the same gray shirt on, and that she started writing. She signed up for this writing class, which she said she was sort of terrified to do, but also compelled. And that was the first thing she wrote, was she wore a shirt the color of storm clouds. And, she went on to write her own story. But how do you find that path out?
Right.
Rewiring your neural pathways, sounds great, but how do you do that? What is the tool? And hers was writing.
Right.
And mine is, creation. It's making art. And lately it's been listening to the trees, sitting in my backyard with no materials in front of me and listening. And I had an experience last week where I had pruned some suckers that were coming out of the trees, the little sprigs that are not supposed to be there. Cut them off, had a bunch of them in my hand, thinking, oh, I can weave with these. What wonderful materials to weave with. And then started swinging them around over my head and swirling. And it was a still day. And, the little leaves are rattling on my sticks. And I stopped. It felt really good because I was a little stiff. I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels good. I'm moving these branches around. And I stopped. And then all of the trees around me, a breeze
started moving.
A breeze came through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was really still just a minute ago. And then the breeze stopped. And I did it again. And the trees responded back. And I did it again. And I felt like, is this really, are they responding to me? Is there a relationship here? And I'm like, of course there is.
Yeah.
Of course there is. And how nice for me to recognize that I'm connected to the trees that I share 25% of the DNA with, which I did not know until you just told me that. But, then I went in and got my drum and I sat outside and played music with the breeze going through the leaves. And it was the best thing I'd done for myself in weeks, including a massage and therapy and yoga. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And everyone has access to some level of sitting on the ground.
But I think that the unfortunate thing about how we live with technology is not affording us those opportunities. I mean, we're making choices. I'm not saying we or you, but people make choices to spend their time in certain ways, which is further disconnecting them from
and most
the
people
reality
think that sounds crazy. You know, like a lot of people. But when I tell the second graders that story,
it makes sense.
They're
to
like,
yeah.
And then did it do it again? I'm like, it did.
Right.
Because we live in a magical world. But that's the adult thing. We've forgotten our connection. We've forgotten that our resiliency, you know, that the earth will take that pain. She will compost it. You know, like we're children of the earth. You know, she's our mama. We can take that to her. But we forgot how to do that.
Well, and we think that we're the highest form of intelligence on the planet, and we're really not.